The global shipping industry moves 12 billion tons of goods a year across the ocean. But what you may not know is every single one of those cargo ships is also a floating chemical plant. A single large merchant ship produces up to 8 tons of oily, toxic bilge water per day, a cocktail of fuel oil, heavy metals, and carcinogens. And that waste has to go somewhere. You'd think it would be taken care of carefully, but much of the time it goes straight into the sea. Intentional oil dumping from cargo ships puts over 100 million gallons of waste oil into the water every year, not from accidents or tanker explosions, just routine engine waste flushed overboard. This accounts for 46% of all human-caused oil entering the world's oceans, and the system that's supposed to prevent it was designed in a way that makes enforcement nearly impossible. Now, to understand how this works, you need to understand what a cargo ship actually is. These aren't just some little boats. A large commercial vessel's engine can produce over 100,000 horsepower, the equivalent of roughly 500 cars running simultaneously. And just like any industrial operation, that engine generates waste. The bilge is the lowest internal cavity of the hull, essentially a catch basin where every leak, drip, and condensation event in the engine room ends up. Fuel oil, hydraulic fluid, lubricating grease, heavy metals like arsenic and lead, cancer-linked compounds, solvents, rust particles, and detergents. It's not one consistent substance either. The composition changes ship to ship, even day to day on the same vessel. You might think that at the dilutions we're talking about, this stuff isn't that dangerous. But research has shown that dilutions of just 2.5 to 5% bilge water can significantly suppress reproduction in marine copepods, tiny organisms at the base of the entire marine food web. Just 1,300 gallons of crude oil, roughly the volume of 2 large hot tubs, can spread across about 3 square miles of ocean and cause measurable biological damage within hours. Oil films block sunlight and oxygen. Seabirds are the most visibly vulnerable, but the deeper damage is invisible, happening at the planktonic level that the entire ecosystem depends on. And bilge water isn't even the nastiest thing released. There's also things like sludge, thick, tar-like residue left over from purifying fuel oil and lubricants, or scrubber wash water, the acidic, contaminated byproduct produced when ships use scrubber cleaning systems to remove sulfur from engine exhaust. So how is this supposed to be managed? Well, the international rules come from the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships, or MARPOL for short, first adopted in 1973. Under MARPOL, the core discharge standard says ships can release bilge water into the oceans as long as its oil content doesn't exceed 15 parts per million. To meet this, ships use oil water separators, or OWSs for short, which process the bilge. A monitoring device checks the oil content, and if it exceeds 15 parts per million, an automatic shutoff is supposed to divert the flow back into the holding tank. Ships must also maintain an oil record book, a paper logbook documenting every operation involving oily waste. Every completed operation gets signed by the officer in charge. On paper, this sounds functional, but here's the thing. That 15 parts per million standard dates to MARPOL's original framework and hasn't been meaningfully updated even as global maritime trade has more than quadrupled since 1973. The environmental compliance isn't free either. It accounts for 3.5 to 6.5% of a ship's daily operating costs on a compliant ship. Well, I'll be honest, that stat was from the Maritime Transport Committee in 2003. I couldn't find any more recent data, but it's safe to assume that it's a good percentage of the cost today. And here's the structural vulnerability. The entire system is self-reported. The crew operates the equipment and records the results. The oil record book is paper, and the entity responsible for making sure all of this actually happens is simply the country where the ship is registered. Which leads to the obvious question: what is the country, and do they care? Well, this is where it gets interesting. Under international law, every merchant ship must be registered in a country, its flag state. That country has exclusive jurisdiction over its ships on the high seas. Unsurprisingly, today, the 3 largest registries are Panama, Liberia, and the Marshall Islands, collectively flagging roughly half the world's fleet by tonnage. But the owners of those ships are based elsewhere entirely. None of these countries are even among the top 35 ship-owning nations. Liberia's registry isn't even operated from Liberia, it's run from Virginia. What these registries offer is low fees, almost no taxes, minimal regulation, and the freedom to employ extremely cheap labor. And if a registry gets too demanding, then owners can switch flags in weeks. It's called flag hopping. Now, the International Maritime Organization, or IMO for short, writes the rules, but it doesn't enforce them. Neither the IMO nor the UN has oversight or enforcement authority over these treaties, so the system puts enforcement responsibility on the entities with the least incentive to enforce. The percentage of the global fleet under flag of convenience registries has grown from about 4% in the 1950s to roughly 73% as of 2023. An estimated 10 to 15% of the world's 95,000 plus commercial ships routinely dump bilge water untreated. So, how does the cheating actually work? Well, there are three main methods, each more sophisticated than the last. The first is what's known as the magic pipe. It's the simplest and most visceral, a jury-rigged or permanently installed pipe that diverts untreated bilge water directly overboard, bypassing the OWS entirely. It's called magic because the waste just disappears. Some are detachable, disconnected, and hidden before inspectors arrive. Others are built so convincingly into the ship's plumbing they look like original construction. On the US-flagged car carrier Fidelio, Coast Guard inspectors lifted a deck plate and found a permanently installed bypass that was part of the ship's original design. The second method is more calculated. The crew dumps untreated bilge through whatever route they can find, sometimes pumping it into the sewage system, since ships can dump sewage untreated on the high seas. Then, to cover their tracks, they run clean seawater through the OWS monitoring equipment in the exact same volume. The digital record shows a legitimate discharge. On the MV Longshore, the chief engineer ordered the crew to pump oily bilge water to the sewage tank via a portable pump, then directed them to pump roughly 9,600 gallons of clean seawater through the OWS to create a false electronic record. The monitoring system recorded something, just not the truth. The third method is the most systemic. Crew open valves in the engine room to trigger the ship's emergency ballast pump, which sends oily bilge water overboard through a system never designed to be monitored for pollution. Other variants include routing waste through laundry drains, boiler blowdown systems, and grey water lines. The ship's own safety infrastructure gets turned into a dumping mechanism. And these dumps don't happen in broad daylight. They happen at night, in storms, in the middle of open ocean, far from shore and far from surveillance. Now, you might be thinking, just inspect them. But the problem is that the inspection system relies on the oil record book, which is the one thing that every cheating method is designed to falsify. Data from the Paris Memorandum of Understanding, a port-state control agreement among European and North Atlantic maritime authorities, confirms it. Incorrect oil record book entries are among the most common individual deficiencies found in inspections. Royal Caribbean's crew had a name for their oil record books, Eventerbook, Norwegian for fairy tale book. So if inspections rely on fake records and flag states won't enforce, how do you actually detect this from the outside? Well, there's a promising answer: satellites. Synthetic aperture radar, or SAR for short, can detect oil on the ocean surface regardless of cloud cover or darkness. Oil smooths the water, creating distinctive dark streaks in radar imagery. Combined with the automatic identification system, a mandatory GPS broadcast from large ships, analysts can sometimes identify the specific vessel at the origin of a slick. The results are damning. A satellite analysis covering 2014 to 2019 identified over 90,000 ship origin oil slicks, covering an area the size of Italy. A properly treated discharge at 15 parts per million leaves no visible trace, meaning any oil slick visible from space is illegal by definition, exceeding legal limits by at least 3 orders of magnitude. But here's where reality sets in. Satellites can't cover all of the world's oceans in detail as of now. Of those 90,000 plus slicks, just 0.5% were reported to authorities. So if satellites can't close the loop, who actually catches these ships? Well, the answer is uncomfortable. 76% of all successful US prosecutions under the Act to Prevent Pollution from Ships came from whistleblower disclosures. On the Caribbean Princess, a 27-year-old Scottish engineer named Chris Keyes used his phone to photograph the engine room computer screen showing how discharges were being manipulated. That evidence led to the largest criminal penalty ever imposed for vessel pollution. The risks are enormous. Ships are small, isolated worlds. Whistleblowers have been threatened with retaliation, blacklisted, and fired. These are people choosing career destruction over a principle. But US law offers whistleblowers up to 50% of the criminal fine collected. Between 1993 and 2017, courts awarded 205 whistleblowers approximately $33 million. Critically, whistleblowers don't need to be US citizens. This single mechanism, paying people who witness crimes to report them, has produced more enforcement action than every other method combined. But a system that depends entirely on individual courage to function isn't a system that's really functioning. And the economics explain why the dumping continues. Shore disposal costs money. OWS maintenance costs money. Only 7% of vessels calling at Rotterdam, Europe's largest port, deposit their waste oil. And that's the reality of all this. The ocean is vast, jurisdictionally fragmented, and visually uniform. There are no explosions or headlines. No single dump is catastrophic enough to make the news. The cumulative effect is invisible precisely because it's distributed across millions of square miles of open water, but it's frequent enough to matter. So, what could actually change this? Well, there are concrete interventions available, and none of them require new science. First, tamper-proof digital oil record books. The IMO has already authorized electronic record books. Systems exist right now that interlock with discharge equipment, record GPS coordinates, flag unauthorized changes, and send automated reports. As of 2023, 73% of vessels still use paper logs to some degree. The technology exists, the barrier is just adoption. Second, sensors and automated shutoffs on discharge systems. Modern monitoring equipment can automatically stop discharge if oil content exceeds the limit, record operational data for 18 months, and detect attempts to flush the sensor with clean water. Physical tamper prevention, like welding beads on pipe flanges and security seals, makes magic pipes harder to install and harder to hide. Third, globalizing whistleblower protections and rewards. The US model works. It's the single most effective enforcement mechanism in existence. But surprisingly, no comparable program exists in Europe, where fines are way cheaper and the EU Whistleblower Directive doesn't offer financial incentives, only protection against retaliation. Expanding whistleblower reward structures internationally would multiply the one mechanism that actually catches these crimes. None of these require impossible political consensus. They require the decision that the cost of pollution should be carried by the industry that creates it, not absorbed invisibly by an ecosystem with no voice. Until we decide it deserves the same protection we give a backyard, it'll keep absorbing what no one wants to see, but we will eventually reckon with. Thank you for watching.